Should we make a start?
Yes, I think that'll be good.
Let's make a start. In which case, welcome everyone to the first of our summer SEPAD special sessions, all beginning with S. Today, we are going to be talking about discourses of sectarianism, and I'm really delighted that we've been able to pull this together thanks to the hard work of three people who I'll say a few words about in a minute. For those of you unfamiliar with our work, SEPAD is a collective project funded by Carnegie Corporation from New York and the Henry Luce Foundation, and we are looking at the critical understandings of contemporary sectarianism and the interplay of sectarian politics with questions of sovereignty, questions of the state, geopolitics, and much more, I guess. Part of that stems from the intellectual curiosity of our fellows. And we have a wonderful group of fellows who you can find on our website, which is www.sepad.org.uk. And I'm delighted that it's the intellectual curiosity of two of our fellows that bring us here today. And they are at the top of your screens, Aziz and Mustafa, Aziz Al-Ghashian and Mustafa Menshawi. And I'm really excited about this. The event came out of some discussions that I had independently with both Mustafa and Aziz about the importance of discourse within processes of sectarianization. And in recent years, there's been a lot of work on sectarianization as a means of understanding processes through which sect-based difference emerges and is reproduced and evolves. But there's a glaring hole in actually understanding the ways in which those processes of sectarianization play out. And those of you that are familiar with the literature on securitization will be shouting and screaming, but there's a literature here that helps us to do this in terms of looking at the way in which language is used to frame particular groups, particular issues as quote unquote existential threats. But yet that migration from debates within securitization to sectarianization has not really taken place as yet. And it seems to be a glaring omission. So this is why I'm really delighted that Mustafa and Aziz have come together and decided to put together this really interesting workshop that tries to fill the gap, that tries to look at the ways in which discourse plays a role in sectarianization. And I'm really looking forward to hearing these discussions over the course of the day. I'll just very quickly say that we have other workshops lined up over the summer. We have one that looks at the role of oil in geopolitics and domestic politics, which is very exciting. That'll be taking place in September. And we have one on sectarianism and urban politics that has been titled Sects and the City Too, as a follow-up to a workshop we did pre-COVID, so before COVID. So very exciting times ahead for all of us in SEPAD. We're really looking forward to it, and I'm delighted that you're here to join us today. Guys, I'll hand over to you. You have some things to say, I believe. This is strange. Normally we can't stop you from talking.
No, I'll take most of the time. Don't worry, I'll make up. So thank you, Simon, for what you've said, and thank you everybody for coming here today. Good morning, firstly, wherever you are. As Simon said, my name is Aziz Al-Ghashian. I'm one of the fellows with SEPAD, and it is with great pleasure that as Simon said, we could bring our curiosity and our investigative kind of tendencies to this workshop today. Just a little bit about myself. My work was involved regarding Saudi foreign policy and Saudi-Israeli relations, and I began as a PhD student, to look at this role of discourse, and I found discourse to be really a very helpful entry into understanding knowledge and understanding identities, and most importantly, what functions do they play? What functions does language play? And you know, as Simon said, when I joined late last year, I couldn't help but find a theme of discourse kind of emerging within the discussions, and it was about time that we allocated a bit of effort to discourse analysis and understanding the role of discourse and knowledge. And of course, as you all know, it's a good entry into understanding so many other themes of power, of identity, of knowledge, of sovereignty. And it's very exciting to, you know, have this discussion with everybody and all you guys joining. So we thank you all very much. We thank the panelists for joining. And we thank, of course, the organizers and Simon and Mustafa and Ilyas and all these people behind the scenes that are helping us, you know, join more and investigate further into this role of language. So I very much look forward today. I hope you guys enjoy it. I'm sure we're going to come with a lot of good, fruitful discussions. And I'll pass it over to Mustafa, the co-organizer.
Thank you so much, Aziz, and it's my pleasure co-organizing this event with you. And thanks, Simon, for pushing our initiative forward. And it's a very SIPADI thing, actually, to give the initiative, and things are actually as moving as getting on traction as quickly as possible. It's thank you guys for coping with us as well. It's a bit hard time organizing things from different countries as well. Just I want to make 3 quick points. First, is I, as myself, as a postdoctoral research fellow at SIPAD, University of Lancaster, I think it's great to take this opportunity as just for myself, as I'm presenting as well, to get feedback on my research. And I imagine every one of us is actually working. His paper is a work in progress. It comes in a rough cut. So please take the opportunity, and I do that myself, is actually to get the feedback of other colleagues. It's a unique, great opportunity for others to listen to myself and give me a very honest and detailed and critical feedback. The third element is the special issue. We're working on it. Please, we're keeping an eye on each one of you's paper. Hopefully the special issue is coming, where we are trying to set it up with a highly ranking, just esteemed journal. So we are working on that. It's our pleasure we cannot accommodate every paper, of course, but we will do our best to get the best out of the event for today. So it's our pleasure. That means actually our cooperation can be extended for the future. So just stay tuned, as they say. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, both of you. Before we get started, there is also one other person that we have to begin by thanking. So Elias, can you just put your camera on for a second, please? We just need to introduce and thank Elias Ghazel, who is another of our wonderful fellows. He's doing some work with SEPAD, and as I said yesterday in some meetings, Elias is the man that makes it happen. So we have a bunch of good ideas, and then Elias takes those ideas and makes them happen. So this wouldn't be possible without Elias. Thank you so much. Really appreciate all of your efforts. You can switch your camera off now, but thank you. Unless there's anything to say. I guess there's some quick housekeeping. The event is being recorded as per an email from Aziz, I think, yesterday. If you would not like this to be used in any way, shape, or form, please do let us know. We can edit things, we can take it out. We don't have to make anything public for all manner of reasons, and that's absolutely fine. So please don't feel bad about that. This is an event to try and facilitate discussion and critical reflection into an underexplored area. So it is quite a formative process, but I think it's something that can be a real marker in the sand for a new area of study in the subfield of sectarianism studies, if indeed we are dealing with that. I'll ask you all to put your questions in the Q&A. Any comments that you may have, any live remarks, let's use the chat function for those, please. Any observations that you have on the basis of what people are saying at that particular moment, put them in the chat box. Otherwise, Q&A. I'm delighted that this first panel that I'm chairing is on discoursing Saudi-Iranian relations, which is an area that I've been working on for a long time. And within this study of Saudi and Iran and the rivalry and understanding the rivalry, there's a lot of talk about cultivating relations between members of the faith communities. And there's a lot of talk about demonizing the other and framing the other as existential threats, without very much actual discussion of the language and the discourses, the narratives that are being used with regard to the other, either internally or externally. So I'm really excited to sit back, listen to three wonderful speakers today. First up, we have Olivia Glombitza, whose paper is titled "Let Us Rid the World of Wahhabism, Saudi Arabia and Iran's Foreign Policy Discourse." Then Tom Walsh from Durham, who is talking about visual propaganda in the Saudi-Iranian rivalry. And then Sadia Rafiq. Sadia, is it just you today? Great. From the University of Lahore, who is looking at discourses of sectarianism, state apparatus, and cross-sectarian harmony. So 3 wonderful papers. Each of you has 15 minutes or so. I'll send you a message in the chat. You hit your 15 minutes. If you go over 17, then I might start wagging a finger or something like that. But we've got plenty of time. Okay, so let's go to a different type of language, a different type of discourse, and the visual side of things. Tom Walsh from Durham is going to talk about visual propaganda, which I think is a really interesting area. Similarly, in the debates about securitization, there is a growing trend in looking at imagery, non-verbal forms of communication, and I think that's certainly something that needs to be explored in more detail with regard to sectarianization. So Tom, same principle applies. I will do a very single wag in about 17 minutes, but yeah, we've got.
Okay, great. Thanks, Simon, and thanks to Aziz and Mustafa as well. You know, the topic I study seems very similar in many ways to Olivia's. So I think Olivia set some really good groundwork for what I'm going to say. I'm going to try and share my screen. Hopefully it works okay. I've got a presentation. I have timed this. Hopefully we'll be able to get through. Can everyone see that okay? Okay, great. So I'm just going to change my view so I can see. Okay, so as Simon sort of mentioned, the primary focus of my talk today is going to be on visual propaganda. Now, there's many reasons for this. I think the visual has a profound impact in the Middle East. I mean, if you think of murals, you think of the flags of Hezbollah and the IRGC, you think of some of the visceral images of death that come out of Yemen and Syria. I think it's really crucial to look at, especially in the context of the Iranian-Saudi rivalry. Also because 2 of the things that I use to study this dynamic is securitization theory and critical discourse analysis. Now, both of those, I think, are guilty of focusing too much on the written and spoken word and not enough on the visual. I think it's underdeveloped. So my primary focus is on comparing the Syrian and Yemeni conflicts. I'm not going to go too much into the specificities of those wars today, because I want to focus primarily on showing you how I analyze the visual. But broadly speaking, I look at Syria from 2011 to 2015 and Yemen from 2015 to 2019. Like Olivia, I'm analyzing sectarian propaganda in my research, and those periods tend to contain the most of it. And that's based on Alexandra Siegel's 2015 work on Twitter that identified that. So as I said, I have timed this, but I'll kind of try and skip through the boring methodological stuff if I can, but just I'll go as quick as possible. So core aims, just briefly, is I want to spend some time looking at securitization theory and showing you the ways that I've adapted that to fit the context I'm looking at, but also to make it more relevant to social media rather than the conventional sort of print media analysis and that it focused on before. I've already seen I've made a typo there, but oh well. So the same with critical discourse analysis. I want to make it more fitting to the Middle Eastern context, I think, and also to the visual. So I think there is something specific to visual propaganda that makes it different. I'm going to talk about why that is and what those things are. After I do that, I'm going to provide a model for the systematic analysis of the visual. So when I talk about the visual, I'm not just talking about photographs or cartoons. I'm also talking about videos, and I'm going to be looking at them towards the end, one of those towards the end. But before I do that, I've done some primary research using a piece of Twitter API software called Scrawl, just to kind of justify the importance of this visual analysis. And then, as I say, I've just cherry picked a few of the most visceral and I think important examples from the Saudi and Iranian sides to show some of the dynamics of the way they use the visual. So, as I say, I'll try and whiz through this stuff as quick as I can because it's not the most exciting, but I think it's important nevertheless. So securitization theory, I think we can all probably agree conventionally is fairly Eurocentric, based on the European context, and also quite narrow pre-internet or early internet stuff. So they understand the audience in the legitimization process is fairly, just a legitimizer. They just kind of accept elites speaking, and then the things become justified. The extraordinary behavior becomes justified, right? In social media, that doesn't really work. As we know on Twitter, it's all about kind of the interaction, the dynamic construction of information. So I see the audience as being far more active in this process of securitization. Secondly, I think that the focus on the audience has primarily been kind of a domestic audience, and I'm much more concerned with elite to elite securitization. So how is Saudi Arabia justifying what it's doing in Yemen to America and Britain, or to the rest of the Gulf, for instance? An area that I think has been really under-researched is functional actors in securitization theory. So in securitization theory, generally speaking, we've got three things. We've got elites or aggressors, we've got the audience, and then between the two, we've got functional actors. Now, these functional actors are things like the media or the religious elite, which are considered of having some kind of influence on the process, but nothing profound. Now, my opinion completely throws that out of the window. I think in the Middle East, the media and the ulama are the key tools of propaganda, of securitization. So I understand it. I understand them as part of the state infrastructure and as not separate. So I understand it as a nexus of securitization. Just quickly, often the question gets asked, why does Saudi Arabia keep on with Yemen? Why do they keep on with these things that ultimately perpetuate their own insecurity? Now, my argument there is something called ontological security. And basically, in short, my idea of that is that because these identities have been developing so long, in my opinion, since 1979, they've become part of the fabric of identity for being Saudi, or being a Saudi elite, or for being an Iranian, or being an Iranian elite. The anti-Saudi, anti-Iranian thing has become a part of being a Saudi, or being a Wahhabi, or all those other old identities, tribal identities, that kind of thing. A good example of that, to answer the question, why do states pursue security-seeking programs that ultimately perpetuate their insecurity? I mean, why do people perpetuate anything that perpetuates their own insecurity? There's a lot of human behavior. If you look at like abusive relationships, for instance, people stay in them, but it just becomes part of their normality over time. It's cognitive behavioral therapy can teach us quite a lot about that. So I'm going to whiz through this part because I don't want to spend too long on it, but basically critical discourse analysis, looking at context as well as language. Now, it often gets accused of being a bit wishy-washy, doesn't provide a systematic program for analysis. So I found a methodology from LaGreca and Tracy in 2009, which is influenced by the post-structuralist ethic of being quite flexible. And they did the seemingly insurmountable of putting process tracing and discourse analysis together, which people always thought was impossible, just as a way of ordering the approach of critical discourse analysis. So just quickly define the case, gather micro, meso, and macro data, and then you order it chronologically to identify the themes over time. And then you structure your case study when you're writing it up based around structured questions. So for instance, how has sectarianism developed over time? The other thing, just quickly, I think Olivia alluded to this to an extent. There's this idea of, I call it alienating sectarianism or sectarianization and unifying sectarianism or sectarianization. Now, my opinion, based on the work of Fanar Haddad broadly, is that historically speaking, sectarian identity is quite a taboo in the Middle Eastern context, especially in its unifying form. So saying, we're all Sunnis, let's band together, or we're all Shias, let's fight the Sunnis. And the reason that is because I think a lot of the dominating narratives throughout the 20th century were, as Olivia said, kind of pan-Islamic in nature, including, you know, some of the rhetoric from the Islamic Revolution, Iranian Revolution, or pan-Arab, if you go back to Nasser, or unifying around anti-Israeli sentiment, potentially. So I think sectarian people are nervous of it. So they're more likely to focus on othering and alienating than they focus on unifying. Okay, well, that's the boring stuff out of the way. So the visual is kind of what my talk is about today. I've just got one eye on the time. So the visual is something that's been developed a little bit in securitization theory. Lena Hansen's worked on this. And there's two things I really agree with her on about the specific nature of visual propaganda. It's immediate and it's circulable. And when she talks about immediacy, she's talking about it has an immediate emotive impact on you when you see it, especially if it's a very visceral image, in a way that words don't so much. It takes a little bit of time to process language. So for instance, a lot of the, unfortunately, a lot of the pictures that I have to study when I'm looking at Yemen are pictures of dead or dying children. That has an impact in a way that words never can. Now, when we're talking about circulability, pictures in the way that words don't spread across the internet like wildfire. The other thing about that is that you can see those images without intending to see them, which has a specific impact. You know, you can open your phone, go on Twitter, and there it is staring you in the face. Also, the visual has a universal language to it. A picture doesn't have to be in Arabic or in Farsi to be understood. Anyone can understand it. Now, that's the thing I disagree with Hansen on, is that she says that pictures are fairly ambiguous and pictures can only really be understood if they've got words explaining them. I disagree, but the post-structuralist in me says, well, I disagree some of the time. I agree with her some of the time. Sometimes you need words. I think with the picture I've picked here, Tank Man, that elicits an immediate response. I think most people know instantly what that represents. Another example might be Napalm Girl from the Vietnam War. And again, the focus on the visual is particularly important in the Middle Eastern context because of how widespread it is. Now, how do we analyze the visual? I found a great paper by a scholar called Wang, and they, like me, enjoy critical discourse analysis, but doesn't think it was quite up to the job of doing the visual side of things. So they adapted it, and I've adapted it a little bit myself to help fit the Middle East. So multimodal analysis, all we're really talking about there is stuff that has lots of different things going on. So for example, like an Instagram post or a tweet, normally got a caption, you might have a video element, or you might have some sound. You know, there's quite a lot going on. So we need a model for looking at those visual realities. Now, the model, broadly speaking, is this. There's more complexities to it, but I wanted to keep it simple for today. So first of all, and it's borrowed from from Fairclough's model of discourse analysis to an extent. First of all, we've got visual design. So literally what's in the picture. So that could be things like what character is involved, what's the setting, what's going on. Then secondly, visual interpretation. So we're looking at production, distribution, and consumption. Now, I've already said when I was talking about functional actors, I don't see production and distribution to be that separate in this context. I think they kind of go hand in hand. So that's my little bit of innovation. And thirdly, an explanation. So like Olivia was talking about, we can't understand these pictures or these discourses without an understanding of the wider context. So that gets done thirdly for me. Just briefly, this is the research I did on Scrawl. Scrawl has its limitations, but it's also good. You can analyze quite a lot of data. So between the 11th and 18th of March 2020, I conducted a search on Scrawl looking at 5,000 posts containing the words Yemen and Syria. Of these 5,000 posts, 236 contained pictures. Almost all of these pictures focused on the human impacts of the Saudi campaign, with 74.7% of the tweets coming from Yemen. 57 of the 236 of the pictures contained images of actual dead or dying children. Many of the others contained political cartoons and propaganda. And really what that emphasized to me is that this is something that's rife and it's really important and it's happening from all sides. And that's been compounded by further research that I've done latterly. So now I'm going to focus on the examples of Saudi and Iranian propaganda, and it'll probably take me around 6 or 7 minutes. Hopefully that's okay.
We'll let you off, Tom. You can have your 6 or 7 minutes.
Perfect, thank you. So the first video that I've looked at, well, the only video I've looked at for today is in 2018, I think it was March, a video came out which looks like almost like a video game style Saudi invasion of Iran by land, sea and air. So I've picked out just a picture out here from it, but that's Qasem Soleimani, of course, the leader of former leader of the Quds Force. What you can't see there is that those guns are Saudi guns. You might be able to see that the two Ayatollahs, the former supreme leaders, are behind him. But what you can't see is that he's actually quivering and shivering in fear. So it's very much a power play. Now I'll just run through some of the things that actually go on in that video. So as I say, it's an invasion by land, sea and air. And it's really emphasizing the superior might of the Saudi military capabilities. Now, when I'm talking about the international scope of this, they show off their Patriot missiles, which of course are American, and they show off their Typhoons and Tornadoes, which are obviously British planes. So also this was broadcast in many different languages. It also shows the power and primacy of Mohammed bin Salman, who's sat behind a desk navigating the whole thing, looking very in control. As I've said, Soleimani's there. One of the most interesting things for me is that they show them blowing up the Iranian nuclear power plant. And they also show a Saudi aid ship heading for Yemen. A few months later, they signed a deal to send, I think, 1.5 billion in aid to Yemen, despite the absolute decimation they've caused in that country. I mean, that really won't even scratch the sides. So secondly, when I go to visual interpretation, you know, the Saudis deny all involvement straight away. So really we need to start looking at themes here. This comes up in a lot of the way Saudi does things. They deny involvement. However, at the same time, they're sharing it on every single one of their news sites and in many different languages. And it's just, the way I see it is to raise fear, show their might. And that's my real explanation about it, is we have to look at the context of the rivalry, where they were at the time with the war in Yemen not going very well, and trying to get more support for it. So this is probably my most, this is the most fascinating thing that I've looked at for me anyway. And it was actually based on a paper by Jack Stubbs and Christopher Bing from Reuters that found this network of websites connected to one website called IUVM Pixel, which is a pro-Iranian network of sectarian propaganda and anti-Saudi propaganda. And I think the website's actually been, it doesn't exist in its form, but a lot of the other subsidiary websites do. And we can prove they're connected through various technical wizardry. So I've just picked out a couple of examples here from their Twitter, which still kind of exists. And so if you look at the top picture here, we've got a Saudi Arabia sign in the back with the Crown Prince there. We've got a young lady saying, I want to drive, that's fine. Young saying, I want American movies, that's fine. I want to be a journalist, falls through a trapdoor. So that's obviously a reference to Jamal Khashoggi, and amongst other things. Down here, we've got, you know, Saudi Arabia and Israel, Palestinian children on one side of the flag through them, Yemeni children on the other side of the flag through them. So we've got this recurring theme of dead and dying children as a way of gaining support for certain things. So yeah, I won't go too much on Van Dijk's ideological square, but basically it's this idea of alienating the other and promoting the self, or ignoring the negative things about the self. So yeah, I won't go too much into that. I think I've kind of explained it a lot already. But yeah, so the last thing I'll just quickly, okay, I'll whiz through this, Simon, but thanks for bearing with me. So, I mean, this is something that I'm sure everyone's aware of already. So, you know, we've got these rebel groups that are pro-Iranian, and they also bear the same signs of global jihad and Shia identity. And there's the badge of the IRGC, which kind of looks identical. So to conclude, there's just a few things to say, but you know, imagery is used across the board to instill fear of the other. It has an immediate and visceral impact in a way that language doesn't, and it's very important in social media analysis. It's used to unify people under the banner of sect, and I think Iran are much more likely to use that unifying sectarianism, which may be something I disagree slightly with Olivia on. I think Olivia was mentioning that there's more of a pan-Islamic emphasis in their rhetoric, but I think in their imagery, it's more unifying. And also that it's this tool of second resort and last resort. Any unifying sectarian identity for me is always this last resort. And if you look at the Syrian and Yemeni wars, they seem to map that out. You know, Saudi Arabia initially supported secular or secularish groups, and then moved on to sectarian ones. And finally, there is a model for analysing the visual. And I think the model I've devised can be used helpfully when looking at the Middle East in general. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tom. Really fascinating stuff. I didn't know about this invasion of Iran that took place, so I'll be having a watch of that after this panel. So a huge thank you. Lots to unpack there. Lots to discuss. Do put your questions in the Q&A and comments in the chat if you have any. I've got a long list already, and I'm sure I'm going to have even more while I listen to this next paper from Dr. Sadia Rafiq from the University of Lahore. This is a paper written, I believe, with your colleague Daman Nadim, and it's a paper titled Discourses of Sectarianism, State Apparatus and Cross-Sectarian Harmony in the Middle East, a comparative study of Iran and Saudi Arabia. And I'm really looking forward to this. I think it's going to be really fascinating to hear both the comparative dimension, but also the discourses of cross-sectarian harmony. So building on Olivia and Tom's work and picking up on these themes. So Sadia, over to you. Thank you so much. Sadia, you're muted, sorry.
Okay, I can. I'm sure you can listen me now.
Yes, perfect.
This is Rafiq. The reason I started to work on it, that in undergrads in my university, since 8 years, I'm teaching this course with the title Middle Eastern Area Studies. So I have been working on many topics. Anyways, with this topic, I had a particular interest because my PhD thesis topic was actually on the Iranian minority, a case study of Sunnis since the 79 revolution. This topic is actually, you can see from the title, it's unlike to the first presenter, Ma'am Olivia, it's going to cover the internal and external aspect of both the countries. The tools I have used, not only the wars, and plus I have used some domestic discourses as well. So within the field of the worldwide relation inquire about, numerous have examined the many questions of what level of investigation ought to be considered to address the universal moral issues. Any examination has 3 stages, which are the level of vexed worldwide framework, the national level and discrete level. Specialists have much to say about the ponder of human relations and international relations. So while talking about the introduction of my paper, sectarianism in Middle East has existed for centuries. It has been a key feature of the region and has played a role in shaping political and social situation of the Middle East for years. However, in reality, the conflict of a Sunni-Shia sectarian in a modern revisionist phenomena that constitute a reaction to modern day events and social and economic issues in a large number. The major cause of instability and tension in the Middle East is the years of conflict that exist between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran and Saudi Arabia are two regional parts of Middle East. Both Muslim countries are divided on the basis of their religious beliefs. The division is the adherence of the different belief within a religion. While Iran has the majority of the Shia Muslims, Saudi Arabia is the powerhouse of Sunni Muslims. The neighboring countries have blocked themselves into the struggle for dominance to create a hegemony in the region and protect their respective faiths. Saudi Arabia is the home to birthplace of Islam, hence it was regarded as the center and the leader of Muslim world. The revolution in Iran in 79 challenged this authority of the Saudi Arab and divided the Middle East into the two blocks. The creation of the Iran one was an open challenge to Saudi hegemony in the region that leads to the increased tension between two countries. Both countries wanted dominance of their respective sects. Hence, the religious sentiments were used to gain political motives. The overthrow of Saddam Hussein of Iraq in 2003 opened gates for Iran to spread Shia influence in the neighboring country. Leaders of both the countries used sectarianism as a tool of conflict. Viewing Iran as a Shia majority area, Iranian government rushed to back the Shia militants to create a strong opposition against Sunni powers. In other words, religious sentiments were used by powerful elites to manipulate the masses and deepen the Shia-Sunni conflict. The real motive behind this was to gain hegemony in the region and became the representative of the Islamic world. Iran being a Shia theocracy and Saudi Arabia being a Sunni theocracy supported their respective sects in the Middle East to create a dominance. The Shia-Sunni sectarianism was also used in 2011 when Arab Spring began unending governments across the region. This resulted in Iran and Saudi Arabia thrust to gain power in the countries. Hence, sectarianism was backed by both states for their political motives. The spread of sectarianism was made possible through discourses from the school curriculum, religious text, and media. It became important for Iran to promote Shia ideology while defaming Wahhabism. Similarly, Saudi framed Sunni Muslim as only true Muslim, and anti-Shia text became party of state policy. Shia haven't viewed Wahhabism favorably as they object to their belief primarily, but in reality, the sectarian issue has emerged to resist against the pro-Wahhabi state Saudi Arabia and establish balance of power in the region. Iranian government has employed sectarian discourse as a political tool to regulate the masses, spreading hate against the Wahhabism. The anti-Wahhabism discourses have played a major role in shaping political and ideological arguments of Shia community in Iran. The state has promoted its narrative by controlling school textbooks and media in Iran. In addition to this, clergy in Iran, through sermons and interpretation of religious texts, have tried to preach the masses against Wahhabism and threats from Saudi Arabia. Similarly, in Saudi Arabia, the state has employed religious officials and clergymen who have been actively engaged in demonizing the Shia through their sermons and fatwas. This not only discriminates the Shia citizen, but also that generates hate speeches against Shia in the Middle East. Saudi Arab too has attempted to promote sectarian discourse through school books, newspaper, media, and religious sermons. These discourses of sectarianism have proved to be lethal. The continuing deteriorating situation in the Middle East is the proof of that. The state-sponsored hate among Shia and Sunni in Saudi Arabia and Iran has resulted in legitimizing these countries' interference in the internal conflicts of other countries of the Middle East. The discourses of sectarianism have promoted violence, and it is evident from the fact that Iran and Saudi Arabia are involved in proxy wars in the region as well. The continued instability in the region became an opportunity for both countries to increase their influence by extending support and rule of the region. The regional Cold War has been observed between both countries as they became involved in proxy war in Syria and Yemen especially. The Houthi rebels in Yemen are backed by Iranian government as they are Shia, while the Yemen government is supported by the Saudi government. In Syria, Iran has provided support to Bashar al-Assad, who is a Shia dictator. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, Iran has backed Hezbollah group, that's a powerhouse Shia militant group. Hence, the Middle East is divided into pro-Iran and pro-Saudi government, while Egypt, Jordan, UAE, and Bahrain come under the Saudi camp. Iraq is labeled as pro-Iran. Syria, Iran, and Yemen are conflict areas. Syrian government is pro-Iran, while the opposition groups are backed by the Saudi Arab. On the other hand, in Yemen, the government is pro-Saudi, while the rebels are pro-Iran. Lastly, in Lebanon, the main Sunni group is pro-Saudi, while Hezbollah is a Shia militant group. Saudi Arabia and Iran have so far been involved in a proxy war in the Middle East, and their rivalry has defined the changing political dynamics of the Middle East. So the primary questions in this paper are raised are the following. The first is that what are the state-sponsored discourses in both Iran and Saudi Arabia? The second research question which I have raised is the how Shia Islam is framed in Saudi Arabia and how Iran has framed Wahhabism within the state. And the last question is how these sectarian discourses have played a role in deepening the sectarian rivalry overall in Middle East. And with reference to the theoretical framework in this paper, the dominance of the one state over another in an international system is a realist hegemony. In short, power and the ability to use it to dominate other in a system is a hegemony. Theorists equate realism with power, and to acquire it to the possession of military, economic strength, and diplomacy is required. To develop hegemony, it's important to be in the possession of power. As George Millsfield defined hegemony as states that is so powerful that it dominates all the other states in the system. Hence, hegemony is something a state acquires within an international system, where other states are part of the structure. One power controls others and that dominates the region. There are the four features that establish hegemony: hard power in terms of military and economic supremacy, establishment of an order to safeguard this power, dominance and unipolarity with no other state in competition, and lastly, the will to impose power. In realist hegemony, the state aims to construct a unipolar surrounding so that no other state can challenge their dominance. But usually in this system, the other states aim for counterbalancing. Similarly, in the case of Saudi Arabia and Iran, the two countries are major powerhouse in Middle East, and they have been engaged in acquiring hegemony and establish their dominance in the region. After the US invasion in Iraq and removal of Saddam, Iran has tried to fill this power vacuum to extend its influence in the Middle East. The power that was previously held by the Saudi Arab as the sole leader of the Muslim world. The interference of Iran has locked the both countries into the never-ending struggle towards dominant and establishing hegemony. The conflict has taken interestingly turn since 2000, as both countries are involved in proxy war but have used religion and sectarianism to legitimize their actions. Enough work has been done in the paper with reference to the historical background, but in the brief presentation, I'm leaving the historical background, and straight away, the next topic is the sectarianism in Middle East, the conceptual framework, primordialism and instrumentalism theories I have used, and how these two theories have divided the Middle East in the Saudi-Iran rivalry, and eventually the prime most work which I have done, that is the discourses of the sectarianism, how both the states have used that the Sunni-Shia conflict in the Middle East has definitely been on rise because of the increased efforts of the Saudi Arab and Iran to create dominance in the region. As mentioned earlier, the difference between the two sects have existed for centuries, but it has become violent much recently. This paper tries to identify why the region disputes of the succession gained political motive and how both states of the Iran and Saudi Arab have tried to reflect their opposing opposition, not only through their policies, but also the sectarian discourses within the state to make sure the masses are informed about the religious differences. The Middle East was not recognized globally for its Shia Shia-Sunni divide. The region was characterized for its movement of nationalism till the late 80s. It was only the US invasion of Iraq in 2003 that created a power vacuum in the region, and both Iran and Saudi Arabia attempted to fill. Leaders of both the countries use sectarianism as a tool of conflict. Viewing Iran as a Shia majority area, Iranian government rushed to back to Shia militants to create a strong opposition against Sunni power. In other words, religious sentiments were used by the powerful elite to manipulate the masses and deepen the Shia-Sunni conflict. The real motive behind this was to gain hegemony in the region and became the representative of the Islamic world. Iran, being a Shia theocracy, and Saudi Arabia, being a Sunni theocracy, supported their respective sects in the Middle East. Hence, sectarianism was backed by both states for their political motives. The spread of sectarianism was made possible through discourses in the form of school curriculum, religious text, and media. It became important for Iran to promote Shia ideology while defaming Wahhabism. Similarly, Saudi framed Sunni majority Muslims as only true Muslim, and anti-Shia texts became part of the state policy. The next section of the paper will analyze the efforts of both countries in producing sectarian discourses within the state. So the instruments used in the Iran, I'm going to follow one by one, starting with the schools and textbooks. Schools play a major role in grooming and early development. Hence, it is a target of the government in order to spread their narrative and manipulate the masses. Iranian schools and its curriculum focus on discrimination against religious minorities, particularly Sunni and Wahhabi. It also aims to perpetuate the Shia ideologies and propaganda against Shia egocentrism. The interpretation of Shia Islam in the books is approved by the Iranian political order. It is considered sacred, and criticism against it is not welcome. The dichotomy between the state of Iran and its enemy countries, Saudi Arabia, and the allies is the focus of the textbooks. The analysis of the text in the books have been categorized in three major themes. Firstly, the Shia Islamic identity is reinforced and categorized as the right path. The teaching focus on the Shia version of Islam. For example, in Sunni version, first 4 caliphs are mentioned as successor of the Prophet Holy Muhammad, but Shia Muslims have determined belief on 12 Imam. And it is mentioned in the grade 7 Islamic Culture and Religious Studies textbook, page 77. During his absence, he is the hope of the Shia and the oppressed. In the hope of his re-emergence, they endeavor to lay the ground for establishment of the universal Islamic government. Imam Zaman is the 12th Imam, is the repository of the hope of the Muslims and the oppressed of the world. Secondly, a few non-religious textbooks have displayed a negative representation of the Sunni figures. This is further extension of the bridging Sunni-Shia gap. This is again the grade 7 book, history textbook, page 4. The enrichment of those around Osman and the improper actions of the government agent has caused the discontent of many people. In 35, after death Hijri, Iraq and Egypt came to Medina in order to lodge complaints against the Osman's agents. Osman became fearful and asked Imam Ali for his help. Lastly, the textbook aimed to reinforce both religious and national identities simultaneously. The state-devised curriculum of Iran also encouraged political subversion and terrorism against the Sunni Arab state by building suspicion between Sunni and Shia. The Arab neighbors are the immediate target of Iran's curriculum. The next below is from the grade 11 history book, and it calls for overthrowing the government in Bahrain. The same chapter includes exporting Iranian revolution in Yemen and Egypt by showing resistance against the puppet Sunni government. And this is mentioned in the grade 11 book, page 251. The next instrumentalization is through media in Iran. Media is a powerful tool that help and shape discourses, spread propaganda, legitimize action, and manipulate the masses. This has been used by Iran to portray a reality that is biased, distorted, and exaggerated. Iran has used its agenda to attack Saudi actions locally as well as internationally. Media has also been used to stir conflicts in the name of sectarianism and bridge further gap between Sunni and Shias. Middle Eastern conflict has been stirred up by the rival parties using media to manipulate and degenerate into propaganda against different sects. This manipulation of religious media and news is deeply connected with a political motive. In Iran, media is controlled by the state. The television has Islamic Republic of Iran, broadcasting through which Iran has constructed its political discourse. Newspaper and magazine are also subjected to censorship, and Iran has one of the strongest internet ban in the country. Hence, the means of information for the people of Iran are controlled by state, while means the government can filter in the information and spread influence and legitimize its own propaganda. The clergy, religious figures have also used religion channel for their sermons on sectarian discourses to further spread misunderstanding between the two sects. The statement channel through media and op-ed analyzed below is the example of how sectarianism is major part of the Iran's foreign policy. That inverted comma in 2016, they mentioned, let us rid the world of Wahhabism. It was a detailed with a page number. It's mentioned in my paper. And Wahhabism has Jewish roots as well. It is also mentioned with the references and the page number as well. And the next main section of the paper is sectarianism discourses in Saudi Arabia, how it is followed. Saudi Arabia is the home to the birthplace of Islam, and it was regarded as the center and leader of Muslim world. The revolution in '79 challenged this authority of Saudi Arabia, and later, like the Iran, Saudi Arabia also started to work to promote the Wahhabism and talked enough on the anti-Shiism within the state. So first, again, the main tool they have used, the school textbook. So the education system has been under fire since the incident of 9/11 for publishing anti-Western sentiments as well. But the textbook have also published material that has highlighted differences between Shia-Sunni sect and promoted anti-Shia sentiments. The education in Saudi Arabia has been influenced by the political and religious sector. It has been employed to legitimize the Saudi government, promote and export Wahhabism, and stir anti-Shia sentiments. The state-produced history books in Saudi Arabia aims to create Saudi and Wahhabism identity. History books have totally omitted the history of Shia Muslim and non-Najdi Saudi Arab. The religious books are heavily influenced by Wahhabi ideology. The other sect of Islam have not only been ignored, but according to the Wahhabi view, only they can be referred to a believer, and other sects are kufr, non-believer. In Saudi textbook, the Shia practices of worshipping, graveyard, crying, and raising voices in Muharram are major sins. And this is mentioned in the Monotheism grade 12 book with the page 49. The Shias is called Rafida, insulting word in Saudi textbook, and their beliefs are denounced as bid'ah. Some books have also to refer to Shia as muskrin, polyatheist and non-believer, and jihad should be waged against them. The mixing of the two sects is inadvisable and dangerous. The Book of Tawheed in Saudi Arabia has called out to raise awareness against the practice of bid'ah. The innovators should be suppressed because they are degrading the Islam. These are the accusations were directed toward Iran. Saudi Arabia accuses Iran of bid'ah, the name of the Shiaism. Saudi textbook also condemned the Shia pilgrimage sites, arguing that building shrines on grave is not acceptable in Iran. Hence, anti-Shia books continue to be the part of the state-sponsored curriculum in school as well as mosque. Ali Al-Ahmad, Shia Muslim who grew up in Saudi Arabia, was questions about the content taught by the Saudi Arab school about the people who do not follow Wahhabism. The answer not only shows intolerance, but also hate speech promoted in Saudi school against Shia Muslim. If you go to the school in Saudi Arabia, what do you learn about people who are not followers of Wahhabism of the Prophet? It was a question. And the answer was that religious curriculum in Saudi Arabia teaches you that people are basically two sides. Salafi, who are the winners, the chosen one, who will go to heaven, and the rest. The rest are the Muslim and Christian and the Jews and the other. They are either kafir, who are deniers of the God, or the mushrik. And it is mentioned with a reference as well. The next tool they have used in the Saudi Arab, that is a sermon and the fatwas. Since the establishment of the Saudi Arab and Al-Wahhabi government, the state has employed religious officials and clergymen who have been actively engaged in demonizing the Shia through their sermons and fatwa. This is not only discriminate the Shia citizen, but also it generate hate speeches against the Shia in the Middle East as well. Religious scholars have called Shia with derogatory terms like Rafida, which means rejectionist. A member of the Council of Senior Religious Scholars in his sermon stated that these Shias are not our brothers, rather they are the brothers of Satan. There is no law in Saudi Arabia against hate speech, and sectarian discourses go unattended by the state. Saad bin Atiq al-Atiq in his sermon have reportedly called on God to destroy Shia. Mosques have become a hub for sectarian discourses, and the preachers continue to fight on sect against others. Sheikh Farid al-Ghamidi in his sermon at Qom University declared Shia enemies and untrusted people. Hence, the sermon and fatwas of the religious scholar have given rise to the anti-Shia sentiment in the kingdom. Large section is the fatwas by the Council of the Senior Religious Scholars in Saudi Arabia. There was a body of the 21 scholars who deal with Islamic research and the issue fatwa. The council's main objective is to export Wahhabi ideology, but it has also been involved in issue fatwa against Shia and their religious belief. Among 21 members, 7 of them refer to the Shia as Rafida, and others have also issued fatwa attacking Shia as kafir. Following are the few fatwa issues by the council against Shia religious belief. Number 1 fatwa 2011, and it was against the marriages to the Shia. The second one with the 8303 number, can Iranian Sunni travel with the Iranian Shia to Makkah to perform Hajj? The other one was, can Western NGOs support Muslim children? Next fatwa by Sheikh Abdullah bin Abdul Rahman al-Jabrin, how to interact with Shia. Fatwas by the Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz. Is it permissible to cooperate with the Shia Muslim? The next is, what are the differences between the Shia and the Sunni? And the last instrument they use with the sectarianism, like Iran, is the media. Media is also the powerful tool that can help shape discourse, spread propaganda, legitimize action, and manipulate the masses. Saudi officials publish articles in newspaper that both are anti-Shia and anti-Iran. Moreover, the interview have been channeled through television, hence Saudi government has issued media to promote its narrative. There is one article by Faisal bin Mashal Abdul Aziz, governor of the Al-Qasim province in 2015. The governor and a member of the royal family, Faisal bin Mashal bin Abdul Aziz, published an article in Al Jazeera. The article portrayed a negative image of the Shia Islam as a threat to the Wahhabi ideology, and it is mentioned with the page 44 references. Later is the comments by the Prince Saudi bin Najaf on Al Madina newspaper in 2015. The 2 police officers were shot in the Shia majority area. The governor remarked, there are the good men and there are also the evil scum. While our country is going through what is going through and standing together as one bloc, we find the descendants of the fickle Safavid Abdullah ibn Sabah who tried to divide the bloc. Safavid was Shia who ruled Iran. Anti-Shia rhetoric on social media. And for that, there is 1, 2, 3, 4 examples for that. And later with the references, enough kind of the fatwas are mentioned. The last section of the paper, the last section of the paper deal with the, I will take only 2 minutes more. Sectarian violence and Saudi-Iran proxy wars. So within these wars, they have covered 3 areas. So I'm going to cover finally, the primacy Sunni groups in the Lebanon. The first one is the Syria, with their national, theological, and strategical conflict, Iran and Saudi Arabia. They play a very important role in the Syria with reference to the proxy war. They have issued in Syria, Saudi Arabia and Iran state-sponsored hatred of the Shia and Sunnis respectively has provided an excuse for their intervention in the internal disputes of the other Eastern countries. In Syria, Iran has provided support to Bashar al-Assad, who is a Shia dictator. Syrian government is pro-Iran, while the opposition groups are backed by Saudi Arabia. In Yemen's government is pro-Saudi, and rebels factions are supported by Iran. Ansarullah, a Shia military backed by Iran and known as the Houthi or the rebel group in Yemen. In Lebanon, the main Sunni group is pro-Saudi, while Hezbollah is a Shia militant group. The vacancy left in the country's political arena has highlighted antagonism between Saudi Arab and Iran. In Bahrain is ruled by the Sunni minority, and the Shia majority has faced discrimination. Saudi Arab has sent troops to Bahrain to assist the Bahraini government in claiming the Shia population. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sadia. Absolutely fascinating, and sorry for having to stop you. I think there's a number of people here who would have enjoyed really listening to your deep forensic dive into the construction of discourses around sectarianism within both states and how that resonates regionally. I think it's really, really fascinating stuff. So we have had 3 fascinating papers. We've got some time. I think we can maybe creep into the coffee break a little bit. So I guess there's time for Q&A. There is one question from Aziz for Sadia. Aziz is asking if you can elaborate a little bit more on the role of hegemony in the context of regional politics. He's saying that neither Iran nor Saudi have played a clear role of being a regional hegemon, but rather they're claiming to be a regional hegemon or acting like a regional hegemon. This is something that Greg Gores wrote about recently, this idea that hegemony is not something to be achieved, but rather aspired to, perhaps. So, Sadia, could you maybe elaborate on that, and then we can go back to others, please?
Should I type the answer or what?
No, by all means, just speak. Just vocalize any thoughts that you have.
Yes, I got your question. Your main query is that both are claiming the hegemony, but how many proofs of their claim I can give? Obviously, the intervention in the proxy war, the last section I have covered in a hasty note. Obviously, in the so many, if I'm not wrong, taking the name from the Yemen and Iraq since 2003, there are many proxy wars where Iran and Saudi Arab since 2 decades are into the rivals. And obviously when they are into the more than the 3-4 proxy wars and supporting the rival groups in each country, so definitely these are the proof of their claim that eventually they are interested in the regional hegemony. And more countries support, they are going to make the more and more established hegemony in the region. So I guess in traditional understanding, obviously, they can declare the hegemony, obviously through more and more territory and more control in the area of the Middle East. So obviously for that reason, they are actually claiming that hegemony through the sectarian political agenda.
Thanks, Sadia. I have a question for everyone, and I'm going to abuse my position, and then we'll add Bettel's question alongside it, if that's okay. I really enjoyed this. There's so much to think about and so much to pick up on. But if I can ask Olivia, if I've understood you correctly, really, really interesting stuff, but this sort of the nuances of ideology and sectarianism sort of intricately play out in Iranian politics. But am I right in thinking that the sectarian discourse resonate more than the ideological discourse in Iranian foreign policy, that there's more of an ideological dimension to what's happening, and that it's not just about the sort of the difference of sect-based communities between the 2 states, but that it's more about ideology, right? But yet there's something about that sectarian discourse, that sectarian narrative, that resonates more than an ideological narrative, right? Is that fair to say, or is that maybe me pushing your argument a little bit too far?
No,
Tom? Oh, sorry, I'll just ask all the questions and then we can go back. Tom, I've written down here, what is sectarianism for you? But maybe that's a question that we can have a chat about some other time. But the question I wanted to ask you is about the role of the audience. And this is something that I think is really, really important and a little bit underexplored, particularly in securitization across the region, in the sense of who is the audience here? Are you speaking to particular communal groups? Is there a direct intended audience? Or as I've explored in some of my articles, it strikes me there's scope for intended and unintended audiences. And when you're putting out imagery and videos and the types of things that you're looking at, sure, there is a very clear intended audience and a direct intended audience, but there's also an unintended audience. And then that seems to have different layers in it as well. So I wonder if you can just unpack audiences a little bit more, please. Who the intended audience is, who are the unintended audiences, who are the byproduct audiences of all of this stuff. Sadia, my question to you is, how does sectarianism relate to national identity, particularly in Saudi Arabia? You mentioned that it was all sort of tied up. So I wondered, and sorry, you said that there was sort of exclusionary, the nationalism of the 80s and 90s, and then sectarianism comes in, if I understood you correctly. But I wonder if you can elaborate on the relationship between sects and national identity in both states, because I think there's something a little bit messier there, or at least in my reading of the role of identity. And then I'll just quickly throw in the questions in the chat, and then we can maybe just go around and wrap all of this up. So a question from Betta to Tom. Thank you for your amazing presentation. Is there any difference between Saudi and Iran in terms of employing visual materials? To my knowledge, Iran has developed a visual propaganda culture, even including graffitis in the street and movies. Thank you. And then for Elias, also for Tom, excellent presentation. How do you reconcile different theoretical analytical frameworks in your research, such as propaganda theory, discourse tracing, semiology, and critical discourse analysis, let alone audience theories and constructivism and post-structuralism? That's not Elias. And post-structuralism. Post-structuralism, sorry. Trying to read two different things. And then, well, now I'm confused. And then for Olivia, from Mustafa via Elias, is the Iranian propaganda constructs Wahhabism as a one version, or are they distinctly separating it from other versions? So putting in mind Qatar is the only other country adhering to Wahhabism as an official creed. So is Wahhabism monolithic, or are there different strands of Wahhabism reflecting the different dimensions? Sorry, this has got very confusing now. But hopefully you've all got a sense of what's happening with the questions. Let's go round all three of you. We'll start with Olivia, then Tom, then Sadia. Give you a chance to answer the various questions that have been put to you, and then we can wrap this up. So Olivia, please.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you for the questions. So if I got you correctly, first, I don't think you were pushing it, but so ideology is more important than sectarian discourse in that sense, right? Did I get that correctly, Simon? I guess it depends a little bit on who we're studying, who are we looking at, and when. Because what I've been doing was a very specific time frame, right? And I looked at very specific people. I did not elaborate very much on the details here, right? Who did I study? Whose discourses did I study, etc. But I think this is important. And also we could see a little bit the difference as well in Tom's presentation. So looking at visuals again, then you might have a different result. So this is important. But yes, in what I have been doing, this one specifically, yes. Ideology takes a bit of a precedent here, but you can also see that as well between the government and the supreme leader. The supreme leader has a more ideological approach, if you will, what we consider maybe like the traditional official Islamic revolutionary ideology. Of course, that comes more to the fore in the supreme leader's discourses. So there's we need to make room for nuances. Mustafa, let me pull that up. Oh, same. Basically here, I mean, because it's very specifically geared to Saudi Arabia. Qatar at that point in time was not really in focus. I did not, in my analysis, I did not see any Wahhabist difference, so to say. But, I mean, there would be a different discourse towards Qatar than to Saudi Arabia, right? Is that what you meant, or do you want to clarify if I did not answer your question, Mustafa?
That's how I took it too, Olivia.
Great, thank you so much. And I shall end here, so not to take more time.
Thanks, Olivia. Tom.
Yeah, great questions, guys, and great presentation from Dr. Sadia. Really enjoyed that. I don't know which one to start with. I think I'll probably start with the third question and go backwards, which was the question about kind of the methodological and theoretical, multifaceted, expansive stuff. There's quite a simple answer to that question, which I didn't have enough time to go in the presentation. The way I understand post-structuralism, you know, post-structuralism goes back to the likes of Foucault and Derrida and those kinds of thinkers, French philosophers mainly, is not to throw the theoretical baby out of the bathwater, but instead to pick and mix your theories and methodologies to suit the context that you're looking at. So I know that's not the clearest answer to the question, but I'm a big believer in realism and constructivism being compatible, and discourse analysis and propaganda studies and process tracing all being compatible, and even more broadly speaking, you know, like area studies being compatible with other forms of analysis. Okay, and then the next, I'll go backwards. So the other question I think was about is from Betul. So thanks for that question, one of my colleagues from Durham. Is there any difference between Saudi and Iran the way they use visual propaganda? I agree, actually, with what you're saying, that Iran has much more of a program of visual propaganda with their murals and their flags and the IRGC and the Quds Force and all of that. What I pin that down to, and I think Saudi focuses much more on discourse, as Dr. Saadi was talking about, with the wording in textbooks, and the word Safavid comes up amongst other things all the time. And the reason I think that is because I think the two leaders are very different, and the legitimacy is very different. So when you've got the supreme leader in Iran, the revolution in 1979, the Shia underdog, that all goes with the territory. And you've got to remember that in 79, it wasn't just Islamists, it was also leftists that made up a big part of it, and even Marxists. And I think they borrowed a lot of that visuality from that school. So that's my answer to that. Whereas MBS is constantly just trying to hold on to power. I think the Al Saud rely on other things like oil. Now, the role of the audience, absolutely. I think here's another thing where I'm going to be quite post-structuralist in my approach. I think I agree there is an intended and unintended audience. Now, with that video, I think there are lots of intended audiences, but I think the primary one was obviously Iran in that case, to kind of scare them, I think, and Iran's allies. Now, the unintended audience, I suppose you could say, would be more of the Sunni countries, to try and show that Saudi Arabia still means business and is still tough and has all the might. But also the fact that they've shared it in so many different languages shows that there's intention there. So they shared it even in Hebrew, right? And English and Turkish and all sorts. So the line between intended and unintended is probably something you could write a whole paper about. So that's not a clear answer to the question, but I think you have to look at the context of each time and each example of propaganda you're looking at. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tom. I bet your supervisors love you and your analytic, ontological eclecticism. Knowing who your supervisor is in particular makes me smile. Yeah. Sadia.
I mean, I think she didn't hear you.
Sadia, your turn for answering any questions.
Which you asked from everyone about sectarianism?
Yes, so in particular, my question for you was this relationship between nationalism and sectarianism.
Even before answering theoretically, what you have used the two terms, living in Pakistan, I'll experience my personal experience that even in the Pakistan, we haven't heard the word of the sectarianism before the 1979 Iranian Revolution. And you will be surprised to know that in Pakistan, before 1979 Iranian Islamic Revolution, in Pakistan, we were not interested in having any idea that people are Shia or Sunni. Why I compare the case of the Pakistan with Saudi Arabia with reference to sectarianism? Because we have a commonality between Iran and Pakistan. In Iran, we have hardly 7 to 8% Sunni and more than 90% are Shia. And the opposite case is in the Pakistan. Because in Pakistan, more than people, 90% are the Sunni, and the same is the 7 to 9% are the Shia. And actually the fabric of scene I have witnessed living in Pakistan as well. What I observed that before 1979, in the Middle East as well, or in the Persian Gulf, there wasn't any kind of the dispute or crisis or the wars even on the name of the sectarianism. There have been the wars on the name of the religion. There have been the wars and the disputes on the religion, but not on the base on the sects. But after 1979, there was emergence of the sectarianism, because to challenge and give a tough competition to the Wahhabi Saudi Islam, the Shia Islam actually portray a new version of Islam and challenge the hegemony and dominance of the Saudi Arab, which was existing and becoming you can say the leader of the entire Middle East. So after the 79, overall, both the countries as in their nationalism, they promote the sectarianism. And at the same time, the answer was given by the ma'am Olivia as well before my answer, that in nationalism, both the countries use the ideology. And unfortunately, both the countries use the ideology of their respective sect in promoting the national image as well. So what I'm trying to convey, nationalism, ideology, and sectarianism, it worked together for both the countries. And it was not existing before the 79. That is my evidence.
Great, thanks, Sadia. So we've gone slightly over time, and I do apologize, but I'm sure you'll all agree it was worth it to hear more from our wonderful panelists. What a great way of starting this workshop. Huge thank you to Olivia, Tom, and Sadia. I've got so much to think about, so many things to reflect on, and I look forward to discussing this with you all more at some point in the not too distant future. So can I suggest we come back here for 11 when Aziz is going to be in charge, I think. And there's a nice slide here from Elias setting out what we've got coming next. So discoursing sectarianism and strategy. Oh, sorry, it's Mustafa. But who knows who that will actually be, given Mustafa is now Elias. I don't know. But take 10 minutes, get some coffee, and we will be back here very soon. Thanks, everyone. Great job.